all of the, and you all can accept that invitation, and hopefully you're all going to stay with us, and more people are coming in as we go. But I am having the pleasure at Kind Mind Community to welcome Judith Sedgeman. And Judith, I've been following you for quite a while, and I say that I'm a stalker for some of the originals of the principles, and I just love what you've been offering with Psychology Has It Backwards and Christine Heath. That was a combination, a win-win. You got two for the price of one on those recordings, and they're available now. Yet, I think at the conference, the 3P UK conference, was when I really had some beautiful messages unfolding through your share and the things that you've been doing. And we decided that bios really aren't necessary in the community of Kind Mind. So I'm going to begin with anyone who has a question or would like to pose a question to Judith, and we'll begin the conversation that way, changing it up and doing something different. And I'm just going to continue opening the room up and inviting people in. So if you have a question for Judith, or just maybe something that you've been seeing from last week with Mark Howard, or some of the classes or courses you've been in, or anything you'd like to know. So we'll just open up to begin that way today.
Well, Kelly, I have a question, if it's okay.
Yes, it's
Thanks.
okay. Welcome.
Thanks a million. Judith, it's a real pleasure to be here with you. I attended your talk at the 3PGC UK conference with Christine Heath, and I enjoyed it so much. And since then, I have probably listened to every episode of your podcast between now and then, and I think it's amazing. I think it's just, it works so well, the two of you, the dynamic, it's amazing. But my question, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that you went back to complete a doctorate in psychology many years after discovering the principles.
Right.
Yeah. So as someone who just kind of would see the principles being a bit at odds with traditional psychology, I would like to ask the host of Psychology Has It Backwards how that experience was going back to complete a doctorate in psychology many years later.
Well, it really made it clear to me that psychology has it backwards, but not to say that. But I did it. I was asked to join the faculty of West Virginia University Medical School because of my involvement in the principles, where there was no degree. You couldn't get a degree in the principles. So the dean, who invited me to be on his faculty, because he was the dean, he could do this. He justified it by saying, she's an expert in this field, which we want to bring into the school. And there is no way she could have a tertiary degree in this field because it isn't offered, but maybe it'll get offered here someday. That was his. So I I would never have made it onto the faculty, but for him, no medical school faculty ever hires somebody with my background. So, so I was there, and I felt it would be disrespectful not to get the degree, and especially since they were going to pay for it. So, so I had probably 20 years in the principles by the time I went back to school. And the thing is, it didn't bother me because I felt like I was studying the history of psychology. And, and it'd be like if you were a doctor and you studied the history of medicine and you went through the chapter on leeches, and you'd go, well, thank God we don't do that now. But, that's interesting how that was a theory that everybody believed in, and it didn't work, but they didn't notice, and they just thought it would work. And so, I just looked at it that way, and I was very respectful of the people that were teaching. They were teaching their little hearts out and the thing that they believed in and they thought was important. So all I had to do was remember what they said, pass the exams. And when I wrote my dissertation, I wrote about the principles. And my committee it's a little hard to put together the committee for the dissertation because I had to find people who were open to the fact that I wasn't going to write about something they already knew. but I did. And I think it helped that I was older. I mean, I was their peer, really. My committee, I was one of the older people on my committee. So, it's like, um, I, it was fine. I enjoyed it. I learned a lot. And it gave me a language that I didn't have before because I wasn't a psychologist. I was prior to that, I was an English teacher, and a business person and newspaper writer. I have a very checkered background of many different careers, and most of which had to do with writing or teaching other people to write and read well, and um, or being an entrepreneur. So when I got into this program, it there were a lot of things that was very helpful for me to know, because it gave me compassion for the people who didn't like me at the medical school. I started to realize, well, given how they see the world and given how committed they are to that way of seeing the world, of course they would think I was crazy. And instead of thinking like, well, they don't even give me a chance, I realized that if you've learned, if you spent 12 years learning that circumstances create people's illness, mental illness, and then you get a degree in it, an advanced degree in it, and you're licensed, and some upstart comes in with a degree in linguistics and says, no, that's wrong. Of course you're going to be pissed off. Why wouldn't you be? So it really gave me a great sense of humor about the many people who didn't like what I was doing. So, yeah. And it gave me a language to talk to them. It gave me an understanding so I could be in conversation with them in a more informed way. So I highly recommend it. I thought it was a great thing.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
And now is the degree, is it like principles compliant? You mentioned you were a faculty member. So have you
No, I'm not
integrated
anymore because I left there, but the degree, the thing about a doctoral degree is once you have it, nobody cares what it was in. They care about the initials after your name. They don't, it doesn't matter what you majored in. And it really doesn't, I never made any effort to be licensed. If I were licensed, I'd be practicing in a regular clinic with regular psychology, which I don't want to do. So, I do my own thing, but I now have a degree that people can't say, but she doesn't know what she's talking about because look, she's got a doctoral degree. It's all made up. It's the illusion of importance. But it works in a certain way. It was helpful. I don't take it too seriously. And, it's so funny because most people who get a doctoral degree, they want everybody to call them doctor. It's like my daughter's got a doctoral degree in statistics, which really was very hard to get. And she gets offended when people don't call her Dr. Quesson, which is, I don't care. People can call me Dr. Sedgeman if they want to, but usually they're people I don't know very well. So most people just call me Judy.
Thank you, Dr. Sedgeman. I appreciate your answer.
I'm just noticing, Judith, that the links for today had a little bit of a mishap. So a lot of people are just trying to jump into the room now. Yet, saying that, I have a question about, there are people here in the room that are from coaching backgrounds, mentoring backgrounds, and have their doctorate and things like that. But some of them don't understand or have a concept of what the principles are.
Uh-huh.
And I'm wondering if you can share to the newcomer what we've been hearing and listening for quite a while that they might be just hearing for the first time.
Yeah, I can do that.
Yeah.
Well, the principles have nothing to do with content. So that's the first thing I want to say is that when we're talking about the principles, people try to make them into a subject matter, but the principles describe where content comes from. So whatever your doctoral degree is in, you wouldn't have it and you wouldn't be able to get one, and nobody would have come up with that field if it wasn't for the principles. because the principles describe how we create our thoughts, create our reality, and how we come into the world to create our reality. So the principles have to do with spiritual facts that explain life. They don't explain psychology. They don't explain business. They don't explain whatever field people are in. They explain how it is we have fields and how it is that people can create all these things and how all this diversity, where it comes from, and how life, the origin of the experience of life itself. So I think the misunderstanding, a lot of people, I hear people say things like, well, I use the principles now, or I'm trying to mix the principles or use them with this other thing I do. And that you're using the principles from the moment you're born until you die, whether you want to or not. So, so that's kind of like, you can't manipulate them, but you can, with an understanding of the principles, which I will get to, then you can access the best aspects of your own creativity and not get frightened by times when you're not accessing it. So the principles, there are three principles: mind, consciousness, and thought. And one thing that I should say is that they're all the same in one sense. There's like a principle, but in terms of the world of psychology, we talk about it in three aspects of the experience of creation. So that's what I would call them, is the three ways that that we can talk about how people create their experience of life. But in a sense, it's all the same spiritual energy. It's just manifested through the way the human mind works. So the principle is mind. And mind refers to the energy, the spiritual energy behind all of creation. So when we think of mind as the energy of creation, the life force, whatever we want to call it, the breath of life, the impetus to live, that is the point. That it's from the inside out, that this is an experience that we are spiritual beings. We're born with this spiritual energy. The spiritual energy essentially propels us into this world. And from the moment we're born as human beings, we use it to create thoughts. The principle of thought is that we use that energy to create thoughts. And because we have consciousness of what we've created, the principle of consciousness explains that once we've created a thought, it looks real to us because we become conscious of it. And the other aspect of consciousness is that it allows us to look both. I always say it's the doorway to reality and the window to the soul. So with consciousness, we can both see the reality that we're creating, and we can also see ourselves as the creator. We can see the source. We can see that this came through us. And how this changes things for people, knowing this. Well, actually, knowing it doesn't change anything, because intellectually you could know this and say, oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I can see where that makes sense. But when you suddenly experience yourself as the creator of your own reality, when it comes to life within you, that, wait a minute, I'm making this up. And then it looks real to me. And if I don't like my reality, I can make up something else. We have this enormous power to think. And with the power to think, we have the power to redirect ourselves, to change our lives, to change our minds, to create something different, to try new things, to live and grow. And so the principles explain the absolute freedom that human beings have while they're alive, that we know of. We don't know what happens afterwards. I'm sure it's wonderful, but we don't know. But in this world of form, we have the ability to participate in the creation of the life that we want, individually and together. You know, if a whole society understood this and they didn't like poverty, for example, they could create something different. If they understood that that's all just thought, it's everything is thought created. Nothing is set in stone. And that's an ultimate freedom. So what the principles explain is why we're free and why we have the absolute ability to change no matter what our circumstances are. The principles also explain what we call innate health, because innate health is this pure, unformed thought that's always this force that's flowing through us, and then we give it form, and the form is personal to us, but the power is impersonal. We have no choice but to have that power. You wouldn't be alive if you didn't have that power. So when we start to look behind the forms that we created to the power that we use to create it, like for me, when I first got involved in this, I had a lot of stress in my life. Excuse me. And I thought that stress was just part of being a responsible adult. I had the thought that, well, you know, if you're successful, you're stressed. And everybody I knew who was successful was stressed, so I had a lot of evidence for it. And I just accepted stress as a way of life. And my doctor told me, you know, you're so stressed, it's killing you. You're just not going to live long if you keep going this way. And I'm like, well, you know, what am I supposed to do about it? I'm running a business. I'm, you know, trying to raise a child and be a wife and all these things going on in my life. And everybody I know is just as stressed as I am. And stress is part of life. And I, you know, and I'm not taking medicine because I don't want to mess with my mind. So at that point in my life is when I met Bill Pettit, actually. He was a client of mine. I was running a medical practice management company and he was a client. And I was shocked to discover a doctor. All my clients were doctors, obviously. And I was shocked to encounter a doctor who had the business problems that he had because he wasn't interested in the business of medical practice. He was interested in helping people. So he had a lot of patients and very little cash flow. And, you know, normally most of the doctors I knew, if they didn't have cash flow, they'd be freaking out. He wasn't freaked out. He was like, you know, I know there's a way to fix this and people say you're really good at what you do. So I'm hoping you can help me. And he was like, you know, I really thought when I first met him that he had a drug of some sort that was really good. I didn't know. I really couldn't imagine anybody being that calm about not having any collections and having all these receivables. But the funny part about it is he was very sincere. He had drugs was not the issue at all. It was like he just understood that that's not my thing. I choose not to do it. I don't want to pay attention to it. I could stay here on weekends and go through. I'm a smart person. I could fix it, but I don't want to. So I'm going to hire somebody to do it. And, you know, and once he's made that decision, he was cool with it and he just went on with his life. And almost all my other clients were like hounding me constantly, you know, what's the percentage increase in collections this month? How are you doing? Do you have any problems? Do you have any patients I need to call? What's going on? And he could care less. He was like, it's you do your thing, I'll do my thing. And I was very impressed with that level of equanimity in the face of what could have been a financial disaster. And I just was stunned when I realized how many patients he had. You know, he had an awful lot of receivables for somebody that had been in town only about 18 months, and he had so many patients. And I'm like, I had other psychiatrists under management, and they had like 6 or 8 patients a week, or, you know, they saw the same people for 20 years, and they'd have this little shelf of files, and he had like massive files. And I thought, how is this possible? He's a solo practitioner. He's got one counselor working with him. This, you know, just doesn't make sense. So I finally said, look, how can you see all these people? He said, well, I don't see all of them. Some of them are through, you know. And I said, through? You've only been here like less than 2 years. And he said, yeah. And I said, well, where are they? The ones that are through. And he said, well, I'm assuming they're having a nice life. And I'd never, ever, ever heard a psychiatrist say the words nice life. I didn't even know what they meant. They would say things like, well, they were on drugs now that seem to keep them under control, or, they've managed to commit themselves to AA, and now they're so far they've been sober for about 6 months, and I haven't needed to see them anymore until they relapse. But, until then they're okay. Or they would say, well, I'm not worried anymore that he's going to kill his children. So, we don't, I mean, it's that they never said the person is happy and they're having a nice life. That just that never came up. And so I remember saying to Bill, how could you say that? You're a psychiatrist. You're seeing all these people with all these mental illnesses, and you're telling me that they see you for a while and then they have a nice life. And he said, well, isn't that the point? And I'm going like, God, what if it is the point? Like that would be amazing. I mean, I was just shocked. So I've just written a book, and so the whole story is in there. I'm not going to go into great detail, but the amazing thing to me was that the world, including myself, the average intelligent people, running the world, had no idea that you could be happy in the face of difficulty and have a nice life, and that mental illness was not a chronic illness. I always thought of mental illness as though it was like having, warts, that that if you had a tendency to warts, you'd have warts your whole life, or having a heart defect, or having, one lung or something, that, you were stuck with it. If you were mentally ill, you were mentally ill forever. And, for Bill, mental illness was a passing thing. People would get upset about things, or something would happen, and they would get, their thinking would get messed up, and then they would wake up to what was going on and have a nice life. And I could not wrap my mind around it, but I was very fascinated by it. And that's how I got started in the principles. And that was almost 40 years ago. So, and obviously I outlived my doctor's prediction, because I'm 78, and my doctor told me when I was that young that I was not going to make it to 60. So there you go. But anyway, but one of the things about the principles is that it sounds kind of, when you first hear the definition, people say, well, it sounds kind of insipid, like mind, consciousness, and thought. So big deal. We think, and our thinking looks real, and then we're conscious of it. I mean, you can belittle it, and you can make it sound like, just another theory. But when people really reflect on it, and when they start to feel the power that they have, that's what happens. Is it happens in your spirit. It doesn't happen in your head. The realization, Roger Mills called this work for a long time health realization. And the reason he called it realization is because it's something that's true for you, whether you know it or not. So you don't learn it, you realize it. And that, I thought that was a very apt use of that word, that people suddenly realize, oh my God, if all the same energy that it's taken me to create all this stress and distress and angst and anger, and all of that energy doesn't care what I do with it. It doesn't care. It's like the electric plug. Whatever you plug into it, it'll run it. And I could use that same energy to create peace and happiness and love and caring and a nice life, And when people see that, the power of that, that's the key, is the absolute power that we have to turn our lives around without anything but our own thinking. That's all it takes. And so the principles, the power of the principles is the realization that behind everything that mankind has created on earth is somebody's thought. And that would include the good stuff and the bad stuff. But if I've created bad stuff in my life, it's only because that's where my thinking took me, and I followed it there because I didn't realize that I was the thinker. And that if I don't like this bad stuff, I can change my mind and I can create something different. And that's an amazing thing. And, people are always asking me, well, how can, the world is in such a mess right now. How can you be so happy and optimistic all the time? Which, I figure whatever time I have left, I might as well enjoy it. But beyond that, it's because the whole thing could change on a dime. If there was if suddenly a lot of people woke up, which is kind of starting to happen, if suddenly a lot of people woke up and thought, oh my gosh, look what we've created. Look what we've committed to. Look at this stuff that we've put out there in the world. We don't have to do that. We could do something different. We could just change our minds and completely change the world. And you could say, well, I don't think that could ever happen. Well, I was interesting. I was in Ireland a few years ago. I was doing some work in Ireland and traveled around. It was beautiful. But in Dublin, we went on this prison tour. They have a tour, various tours, and so I took the prison tour. And it was very interesting because I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the prison. I'm sure there's people on this call who know it. But anyway, it was like the biggest, oldest prison in Dublin. And so in the first part of the prison, the prisoners were put in these cell-like rooms, no light, no windows, a whole lot of people stuffed into these small rooms. They just shoved food in through the bars to them. They had no privileges. They had nothing. Never went outside. And there was a lot of death and a lot of violence. And as the man who was taking us on the tour described it, it was just like the last road before you got to the bottom of hell. And it was just horrible. But they felt at that time, when they designed the prisons, they felt if you did something bad, you should be punished. And that punishment was the answer to crime and violence and all these things. Well, there was a change in the Victorian period when there was a belief that people who were introduced to the idea of God and realized that there was a savior, that their life would change. And so the second part of the prison, when they had to expand the prison because there was so much crime. Okay, so the second part, you walk into this huge open courtyard, open to the sky. And surrounding the courtyard were cells in which individuals were placed. They had a window to the outside that was high up where they couldn't get out of it. It was too small to get out of these windows the way they were designed, but they let light in. And they had bars, on the door so they could see each other. They could see the courtyard. They could see the other prisoners. They could see the guards walking around. They could see what was going on. And the reason that they built the prison that way, which was a complete, total reversal of everything that people thought about prisons, was because somebody said, if you uplift their souls, if you raise their spirits, they will recover from their life of crime. And people believe that. And given that belief, they said, well, we can't be putting them in these filthy, disgusting, terrible, dark, dank cells. How would they ever lift their spirits? So they created this entirely different prison. And the interesting thing was it actually worked, but they still had a punitive side to it, because one of the things that people could observe people happening in the courtyard was people firing range, people being shot, when people line up and shoot somebody. So if you got the death sentence, you'd be shot in the courtyard where all the other prisoners could see it, but then they cleaned it right up. So it's kind of an interesting thing, because they hadn't quite gotten over the idea that the people needed to suffer and be punished, but they thought they really needed an opportunity to uplift their souls. But I saw that and I thought, that's amazing to me, that a whole society, a whole culture, a whole government, a whole country changed its mind about the proper way to punish people and created an entirely different prison because of it. And then you think, well, that really is true, that there are things that change. We don't even realize that when there's a cultural shift, it's because a lot of people change their minds about something. And when a lot of people change their minds about something, that's the only way it changes. If everybody believes the same thing, they'll keep doing the same thing until somebody says, well, what about this other thing? And then other people start to reflect on it, and people have a change in their feeling state in their minds, and they change their minds. I mean, right now, the world is in the process of changing its mind about climate change. It hasn't quite happened yet, but it's getting there. A lot more people are going like, look what we're doing to the planet. This may not be so good. Maybe we shouldn't assume that we're the dominant species, because it's kind of killing us. And so, that's when people have a change of heart or a change of mind, what happens is they get a new idea and it uplifts their spirit. And when they feel that uplifting idea, they go, oh, wait, it may not be what I thought it was. That's the power of thought. And that's where change comes from. And your life can change, the world can change, a society can change, a city can change, a family can change. Everything can change because we can do it. We have the power to think. And that's our gift. And that comes from being a part of creation, whatever we understand creation to be, that we have the same creative power that flows through us, the power of mind that works within our own small mind to create thoughts, which then look real to us. And when they look real to us, that's the experience we have. I hope that explains it.
That was a beautiful explanation. And I think the piece around the simplicity of seeing that change is one thought away.
Mm-hmm. It's always one thought away.
You shared a story about the simplicity of conversation where you made a decision to move across the country.
Oh, yeah.
From one house to another, and created an experience for, I think it was 9 years thereafter, or 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder if you could share that with the group, because I found that to be, an interesting way that we see wisdom pop up, we see it, and we go with it. And oftentimes for myself, wisdom pops up all the time, but I don't heed to it. I might,
that's true. Yeah. Yeah, you override it with your personal thinking and your memory. Right. Very easy to do. Well, so having met Dr. Pettit, first of all, I was no longer stressed. I mean, I got over being stressed and upset, and I started to really like my business, and my business changed because I changed basically, and my staff changed. And then our relationship with our clients changed. And then our clients started to change, and then we all got along at a whole different level. So I could have stayed in that business the rest of my life, and the business was doing very well, but I just became increasingly committed to, at that time, there was very few people in the world that were doing this work. We wouldn't even call it this work. It was like, well, Karen was one of the early people. She would remember this. It's like, there's a bunch of people that thought, this is great. We should really try to get this to people. But there weren't many of us, and there were an awful lot of people. But we all thought we were going to change the world any day now. The whole thing would change. We really believed it. We were so excited about this. So I had met, I would say, most of the people who were around Sid at that time and who were doing the work because Bill knew them, and sooner or later everybody had conferences, or they would come to visit each other or whatever. And so I just thought, I just want to be part of this. There's something in me that just said, this is your work. This is your life's calling. So, and in my previous life, I was very successful, and I was married to a man who owned a bank. And so he was very successful, and we had a gorgeous home, and we had a boat, and we had all the trappings of life that didn't make me happy, but they were certainly there. And I, I ended up having a very amicable divorce because I just couldn't do that anymore. And my daughter went to college. So I ended up with this huge empty house, which I absolutely did not need, and all kinds of stuff, which I no longer was ever going to use again, and a business which I could sell, and which would have, I just didn't want to really do that anymore. And I just changed my mind about what I wanted to do with my life. And I remember one of the early times that I had this conversation with Dr. Pettit about maybe I would get involved in this work. And he said, just remember, if you get involved in this work, you're going to get fat and poor. Fat because everybody sat around and loved to eat, and poor because nobody was making any money doing this. So I thought, I'm okay with that. So I'm sitting in my house, and I decided there's nothing more for me to do where I am, and I need to just sell everything and move. So at that time, the only people I really knew really well and that were involved in the principles, and I didn't know them that well, but I knew them a little bit, with George and Linda Pransky, and they had a center in LaConner, Washington. So I started to think, well, that's near where Sid is, and everybody kind of goes to LaConner from time to time. Maybe that would be a good place to go. So George called me up out of the blue and said, hey, what's up? I haven't heard from you for a while. What are you up to? And I said, well, the divorce is final. I've got the house, and I'm sitting in this giant house trying to think what to do with it. And I'm going to sell my business, and I don't know, I'm going to try to do something with the principles. And that time I was thinking of maybe going to California, because I figured, I cynically thought California is a place where this would be very successful. And he said, oh, okay, that's interesting. And he said, have you ever thought about moving to LaConner? And I'd been to LaConner once, and it was a little rural for me. I was kind of a city person. And so I said, well, not really, no. And he said, oh, okay. He said, well, good luck, let me know what you do. So we hung up. And for a couple of days, I kept thinking, that would really make sense. Because, they're nice, and they're building something around the principles. They really are as committed as anybody I knew. And I could move to LaConner, but he didn't really invite me to move he just asked me if I'd ever thought about moving to LaConner. So I thought, all right, that's what I'm going to do. It just sounded right to me. So I put my house on the market. I called an estate sales place, and I said, sell everything in my house. I'm not taking anything with me. And I took all my clothes to the consignment shop and started over. I had my car and my few belongings I was taking, and I think I moved a little bit of furniture with me and stuff. And I called George's office, and I got somebody on the phone who sent me the local newspaper, which was a tabloid with a back page of classifieds, and there was a house for rent. And it sounded nice enough. It was a little house, in LaConner. And so I called the lady, and she said, we're only renting it for a year, because her husband worked for some company. They were assigning him somewhere for a year, and then they were coming back. And I said, well, that'd be great, because I don't know if I'm going to stay. So I'll do the year. That sounds good. And she said, okay, great. Well, then the house, fine. You sound like a nice person. And we came to an agreement. And so I had a house that I'd never seen. And I closed up my house and got in my car and drove across country to LaConner. So I called George, and I said, well, I've decided I am going to move to LaConner. And George said, oh, that's nice. Let me know when you get here. And hung up. So I was like, I'm driving across country, and it suddenly dawns on me, okay, I just sold everything I have. I completely changed my life. My business is gone, and you don't get much in for a service business. I mean, you can sell it, but unless you're still there when you're the entrepreneur that started it, you don't get a lot of money for it. But you know, and that's all the money I had in the world. And I'm driving to Connor as though I was going to do something I didn't even know what I was going to do. So that for a moment, Terry thought that that might be a little crazy, but then it felt right, so I did it. And so I get to Connor and I called George and said, "Well, I'm in Connor." He said, "Great. Where are you?" And I said, "Well, I rented a house." He said, "Oh, that's nice." He said, "Well, when you get settled, call. We'll have lunch." So I still didn't know if I was going to do anything. And suddenly I'm, in my house and I've paid the movers and driven across country, and I'm realizing I'm kind of eating through my cash. and I'm paying for this house for a year, and I have no idea how I'm going to earn a living and if I'm even going to fit in or whatever. And Sid calls me. And I don't know how he must have gotten my number from George, I guess. But anyway, he calls me up and he says, "So I understand you moved to Connor." I said, "Yeah." He said, "How do you like your house?" And I said, "Oh, I like it really fine." And he said, "That's good." He said, "It's really nice." He said, "How's your kitchen?" And I said, "Oh, it's good. It's small, but it has a pretty view over the garden. It's light and it's nice." He said, "That's great." He said, "Well, I was thinking about you because I'm making pea soup. And I remember one time when I came to Bradenton, you made pea soup, and I really liked your pea soup." And I said, he said, "Can you give me the recipe?" And I said, "Well, it's just the same recipe that's on the package of peas when you get them. I didn't do anything special." He said, "No, there was something in your soup that was different." And then I remembered my mother, when she made pea soup, she always sprinkled some cinnamon in it at the end and stirred it in. And I said, "Well, the only thing I can tell you is that I do the one thing that I saw my mother do for years, which was she sprinkled a little cinnamon in the soup and stirred it in at the end." He said, "Ah, it's the cinnamon." He said, "Great, thank you very much." He said, "I'm going to try that cinnamon." So then I'm thinking, well, I'm talking to Sid Banks. I should ask him about, what I should talk to George and Linda about or something. And I started to go there, and Sid said, "Oh, well, I got to go." He said, I'll talk to you soon." He said, "Well, dearie, it sounds like you've made a great move. I hope you enjoy Connor." And he hangs up. So, but the funny part was, like an hour later, I thought, you know what? You just took charge of your whole life because you're the thinker. You're trying to create a new life. Why don't you take the initiative? Hello. So I called George and I said, "George, I'd like to talk to you about what I'm going to do in Connor." And he said, "Oh, great. Well, you and Linda and I can have lunch and we'll talk about it." So that's how I got started in the principles. But it was so stress-free given what I was doing, because it's kind of crazy. Even when I look back on it, I don't often tell, well, I've told it now because it's also in my book, but I very rarely would have told that story in the past because people go, "Jesus, these people are all crazy. They're in some kind of weird cult or something." But I think most of us did that. Karen, you did that. We just made a move that made sense to us without any understanding of where it was going to take us or what we were going to do with it, but we knew it was right. So something in us said, "This is good, this will work." And that's wisdom. I don't know that we would have named it that at the time, but wisdom is what comes to you in a quiet time when you least expect it, that guides you through life, sometimes in ways that seem kind of silly, but they work. And so that's how I got involved in the principles. I did stay in Connor. The only reason I left Connor is because I got invited to go to West Virginia University. Everybody thought that was kind of cool to have somebody on the faculty of a medical school. So that's how I got started. But what I learned from that experience is listen to the right voice. Don't listen to the people don't listen to your self-doubts. Don't listen to your self-limiting thoughts. Don't listen to the personal mind that tells you, "You never thought of that before. How do you know it's a good idea? You shouldn't, nobody would think that's a good idea. That's stupid." Don't listen to the ruminations of your self-limiting personal history. listen to the inspiration, listen to the things that set you free, listen to the things that speak to your heart and soul. And you can tell the difference by the feeling that comes with it. But, to this day, I live in Bradenton again now, because when I left West Virginia, I came back to Bradenton because it's Florida and it's warm, although I'm actually thinking of leaving again. But I came back to Bradenton, and all the people that laughed at me and made fun of me when I left and then forgot about me suddenly want to be my friend. It's like, oh gosh, she's back here and she's had this amazing career and done all these things. So it's nice, they're nice. But it was kind of a surprise, I was like, hey, some friends of mine that I had stayed in touch with over the years, gave me a party when I came back, and we invited all these other people that I'd known before, and they were like, oh my God, you look great. You look, wow, you're back. This is crazy. What are you doing? And they're all doing the same exact thing they were doing when I left, and I was like, wow, you guys are really stuck in time here. But anyway, that's the story.
I love that story. I absolutely love it, because oftentimes there are those thoughts, those places where you have a pop-up idea and you're not recognizing it necessarily as wisdom, or I'm not. And, I'll squish it down, I'll make it small, I'll pretend it's not. It isn't wisdom. And in fact, it's the only thing that is meant to be guiding me in the moment.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking to a client just before this call. Actually, I had a client this morning, and he's trying to market himself in the business that he's in, and he's read all these books about how to do that. There's tons of books about that kind of thing, and they all sound good. He reads the book and he thinks, oh, that's a good idea. And he reads another book and, oh, maybe that would work. And so he's got like a list of 15 things that he could do. Meanwhile, he's having a hard time paying his rent because he hasn't done any of them, because he can't decide which one to do. And he knows he has to market himself. And I said, well, what appeals to you? And he said, well, they're all a little bit hard. I'd have to, wrap my mind around them. And I said, well, then why don't you look for your own idea? What's stopping you from coming up with an idea that no one's ever thought of before? He said, oh, well, I'm not that smart. We see. And I thought, this is like the story of life. I did that. Everybody does that. It's like you look at all these expert books and everything and you go, oh yeah, I'll do that, and you got to do what your wisdom tells you that's good for you. But you don't know what it is until you hear it. And it's sort of like if, and it doesn't trouble you. It doesn't keep pushing if you don't listen to it. It just keeps coming up with stuff. So it's not like a baby. When my daughter was a little girl and I was busy doing something like standing at the kitchen cooking or something, and she would come up and say, Mommy. And if I didn't pay attention to her, she'd say, Mommy. And if I didn't pay attention to her, she'd grab the bottom of my pants or my skirt and pull on it and go, Mommy, Mommy, Mommy. Well, wisdom doesn't do that. Wisdom says, Mommy. And if you're not listening, it goes, well, okay. Think for yourself. So you got to listen for that little quiet voice, because it doesn't get louder. It's not, wisdom doesn't care whether you pay attention to it or not. It's like the energy of life. It doesn't care how you use it. It's like the electric plug. So we have to learn to quiet down enough to hear it. But as soon as you quiet down, the truth is, as soon as you quiet down, as soon as you find that inner stillness, you can hear it. And you just know, like in your heart, yeah. So, Keith Blevins, when I first moved to LeConner, he said, yeah, this work is sort of like, we call it the aha theory. And I said, the aha theory. And he says, yeah, people go, ah, and And that's kind of true. You suddenly go, oh yeah, that's the answer. Of course, that makes perfect sense. I never thought of it before. That's wisdom. And it's usually something that you maybe even sounds silly to you. I'm seriously, I mean, that's really one of the I'm not trying to sell my book, but one of the reasons I wrote the book was that I was so many experiences I had in life where I was listening to the wrong voice and got myself in some serious, terrible situations. And then when I started listening to the right voice, I would do some things that people might call out of the box. And in my consulting and my work and my life, but they really weren't. They were wisdom that worked for me because they always worked out when I listened to the little quiet voice.
I love that you said that. It's been said to me about the feeling.
Mm.
You know, Sid would often talk about the feeling, and my experience is that just being here with you and getting still enough to be in this room and with everybody here and listening, I get this feeling about being a part of this.
Mm. That's great. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when I remember when Sid used to talk, he always talked about don't listen to my words, listen for the feeling.
Mm-hmm.
And as a person who had been, a student and an academic person and worked in a technical field, I just couldn't imagine that. I was like, what does a feeling have to do with it? Something is either logical or it isn't. Because he would also talk about the logic of the principles, which are very logical. And then all of a sudden, I guess I was, at some point listening to somebody speak, I don't know what, but I suddenly had that feeling. I mean, I was sort of worming my way towards it because I was getting quieter and quieter. And then all of a sudden, I just suddenly had this peaceful, it's like exhaling. And you have this moment where you just go, oh, yeah. And you're okay. You just know you're okay. And when you know you're okay, you're not scared anymore. And because you can't scare yourself with your own thinking. When you really know that you're the thinker, and scary thoughts you made them up. They may scare you, but you made them up. It's sort of like, to use a terrible example, but like when my daughter was a tiny baby and she first started toddling around, babies love anything that they've created, like they spit in their hand and they love to pick their nose and everything. Well, she used to reach in her diaper and paint with it. And and I was like, oh, that's disgusting. But she didn't know it was disgusting. So I made up this stuff that you can smear and it paints, so you have to explain to the baby, no, but that's not stuff you really want to be touching. But, that's before that, it seemed fine. Well, that's what we do. We make up these really poopy thoughts and we go, oh, yeah, that's good. I'll just make a picture of that. And we don't realize that, no, that's not the good stuff. Those are the thoughts that we should leave alone. So I'm sorry, I'm famous for making up disgusting examples.
No, that's great. You know what I love about that is
remember them. I'll give it that.
people can relate. People can relate. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'm having a feeling that maybe some of you might like to share or have something that might be on your mind. What do you think, Judith? Shall we?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, let's open up the room to anybody who'd like to comment or question or have heard something. Yeah, Karen.
I just want to say, Judy, I've so enjoyed watching you over the years and your coming to conferences and speaking about how you were going to just totally let go of everything you had because something else occurred to you. Like I saw you always pushing beyond the boxes. And I want to know, where did the title come from? It started with the bird.
It started with the bird. Well, because the book is about how I discovered how we form thought. And the first thought that I remember discovering that I could make something up in my head that wasn't there and see it was a bird. So it starts when it's all a series of vignettes about how our minds work and how we discover the workings of our minds and how we discover how to misuse them, and then how we, can discover how to get back in the driver's seat, essentially. So
and your book, it's out on Audible now. Are you the one who does the voice?
No, I didn't even know it was on Audible. I have no idea who does the voice. Okay. So that's interesting. Maybe it's Siri. I don't know. Oh, but anyway, I'll have to listen to it to know that. I didn't even know they were going to do that. I think that the publisher that published my book probably has professional readers who read the books, but
as I understand, it's not we don't have the hard copy out yet, and I'm looking forward to that. But I thought if you wrote it and read it, I
would have done it if they'd asked me, but they didn't. Yeah. And I didn't even know they were going to put it out in Audible. It's on Kindle as well. Yeah. And I have the hard copies. They send you a certain number, when you write a book, but the distribution channels aren't set yet. But it can be pre-ordered now on some of the booksellers. So because they know they're going to get them. So now I think it's June 15th when they're going to start shipping them.
Yeah, cool.
Maybe you could share a little bit about the book, just because some of the people here, I know I've got mine waiting on order. So Judith had a project, and we were sharing before the call about some of the things that COVID offered her. Yeah. And so, maybe you could share that, what it's called. And what inspired.
I have resisted writing a book for years, even though I consider myself a writer, and I started my life as an English teacher, writing teacher, and then a journalist. I never wanted to really write a book, and I always thought, I basically thought there's plenty of people writing books, and Sid's written all of his books, and I don't need to be writing books about this. But I was at the conference in London in 2018. That was the last one they had that was live, I think. And I was one of the plenary speakers, and there was a huge crowd there that year. I think there was like 1,200 people there. And at the end of my talk, which to be honest with you, I don't even remember what the talk was about, but it was something about the principles. Somebody came up to me and asked for my autograph, and it just totally freaked me out. I hope whoever that person is not on this call, but it totally freaked me out, because I just was like, why would you want my autograph? I mean, we're all the same. And, I don't know anything that you don't know. I'm just here speaking, hoping that people will see something for themselves. And I said, and it was a younger person who was fairly new to the principles. And I said, I don't want to be rude to you. I really appreciate you. You're very kind. And I'm really glad that you like the talk. And I'm very appreciative, but I don't do autographs. And I don't really believe in it because, and she said, no, I'm not going to sell it or anything. And I said, trust me, I know that nobody would buy it. But I said, you don't want to get the idea in your mind that anybody's special, because that's totally contrary to what we are about. Nobody's special. We're all the same. We're just operating with different levels of engagement with our understanding. But I don't want you to think, oh, she was one of the great people, or one of these or one of those, because we're all the same. You could stand up in front of this group and have people completely entranced at any given moment. So don't do that to yourself. Don't limit yourself by thinking that somebody's more important than you are. Mm-hmm. And so she was a little disappointed, but she kind of got the idea that she respected it. So I'm on the plane on the way home from that conference, and I'm thinking, somebody needs to write about that. like, we're not special. A lot of us have been through a lot of shit. Our lives have not been perfect by any means, nor has our involvement in the principles been perfect, nor have we never been yelled at by somebody for really messing up, nor have we, and I thought, nobody writes about that. People who've written the books about the principles have written about, the work and how well it worked out for people and how beautiful it is and how wonderful it is and how it applies to this and how it applies to that. So my book is about understanding for yourself how you go astray, how your thinking works, how it's obvious that the principles are at work even when you don't know what they are. And that when you look back on your life, you realize that that's all it was, that you thought something and it got so attached to that thought that it sent you in a direction. And so it's not a biography because there's a lot more to tell, but it's a series of vignettes about things that I experienced in my journey towards peace and quiet and understanding the principles, that looking back on it, I realized it was always right in front of me and I just didn't see it. And the reason that I wrote it is because I was sitting on the plane coming back from London and just reflecting on the conference and whatever I was thinking about. And all of a sudden, this little voice came in my head that said, you've always known this, you just didn't know you knew. And that was the beginning of my thinking, oh, I got to write about that. So that's what it's about.
That's a beautiful story.
I should be embarrassed, but I'm not. I was a mess, to be honest with you. I was just a total freaking mess. And I did a lot of really dumb stuff in my life. So, enjoy knowing that we're all the same.
I think we're right there with you.
Yeah.
Do I have it right? It's all about a bird.
Yes, it's called It's All About a Bird. I should have one here that I could show you.
I put anybody that can go to the Kind Mind community page. It'll be all over there because I have you with your picture on it.
Okay, that's fine.
And most of them got the email for today. But
don't feel compelled to order the book, but seriously, if you do, pass it around, or you don't have to buy it. I've written it. I've got my joy out of it. I hope it does well, but I don't care.
I can't wait. I can't wait. But I do have a question. Lynn, did you want to come on and ask Judith yourself about seeing clients and the one-to-one, or do you want me to just, I can't.
Sure, I could, but actually the moment kind of came and went, so it didn't feel as urgent. But when you were telling your story earlier, Judy, thank you so much. I'm just so enjoying you sharing your story. And, one of the things I loved what you said is, nobody's special. I like to think of it as the purpose of all of us sharing our stories is really just to inspire others. and each of us then find our own triggers for our own pathway, and so I feel really so enriched by everything you've shared this morning. I'm really appreciating it a lot. So my curiosity point was actually just about when you got to Lacan, or like what happened next? Was that before coaching was kind of a thing? Where did you start seeing clients one-on-one? Did you do workshops? Just a little bit of curiosity.
No, I spent my first year there as an intern, which kind of was a big surprise to me because I 2 weeks earlier had been a CEO. So that was kind of so I think that George's purpose was to make me very aware that nobody was special. And I sat in with other people who were seeing clients. I didn't know anything about psychology, which was to my advantage because I didn't have any preconceived ideas whatsoever about psychology. I had taken one psychology course in college and I kind of hated it because it was very depressing. So I sat in and then I did groups and then it gradually started working with individual clients and, it just sort of evolved. And so then, I did everything that everybody else did because we didn't bill insurance. George still doesn't, I think, take insurance. So there was no issue with licensure. We were doing something that was so far outside of the field that there was no way we could, qualify it for insurance payments. So, and then George wanted to start working with businesses. And one of the reasons that he was interested in me, I think, was that was the only person at the time in his circle. There were other people in the little world of the principles, but who had any experience in business. And he thought if we're going to work with business, we probably should have somebody that knows something about it, but business is just like everything else in life, but you have to realize that. So, and then I worked in healthcare, and healthcare was kind of a target field for what they wanted to do. So when we started doing that, I did a lot of work, and a lot of individual work, a lot of group work, and a lot of retreats and conferences and things. So yeah, I mean, it wasn't that exciting. It was like everybody else's career. You start at the bottom and you get a little bit of promotion, and you start doing a little bit something more, and then somebody says, well, maybe she could do that, and then you start doing that, and it was nothing out of the ordinary. It was like everything else. It was just like they were running a business, only I would say they didn't realize it. So but when I first went there, they were primarily doing marriage and family therapy, and having recently been divorced, that wasn't exactly my thing. I was not going to present myself as, oh yeah, I'd be great at marriage and family therapy. That'd be wonderful. So I didn't really start doing much with individual clients until we got into doing other things. Although, looking back on it, I could have done, I mean, the thing about the principles is that it applies to everything. And the fact that given my circumstances at the time, I had an extremely amicable divorce. And to this day, I'm still friends with my ex-husband and his wife and his current child. And, I mean, that speaks to the principles too, so it wasn't a big deal.
Thanks, Lynn. Excuse me. Does anybody else have something they'd like to share?
Or ask.
Or question, or...
Yeah, you probably figured out you can ask me anything.
Judy.
Yeah.
Judy.
Hey, Mark.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi there. So great to see you.
The gardeners par excellence. Karen and Mark have the most beautiful garden I've ever seen.
Oh,
I can't wait to get there.
On Facebook, but it's fabulous.
You're all welcome. I was just going to mention, back in the early days when you first came up to Lick Honor and were joining Pransky, and even then there was still there was a reluctance to talk about the spiritual, really deeply about how it's, to shift from normal, just getting people comfortable to through to the spiritual. I wouldn't. How did that evolve for you, or how did you find that?
Well, actually, the funny part about it is that I started learning the principles, working with Bill Pettit, and he always talked about it, and he had no hesitation. I mean, it was very obvious to him that the principles were spiritual. So I was shocked when I got to Lick Honor and nobody talked about that. Everybody talked about thought, and they didn't talk about the nature of creation, and the principles is deeper than before thought, And I kept bringing it up at staff meetings, and George, and they all knew about it. I mean, everybody hung out with Sid knew about it, and George would say things like, well, clients aren't ready to hear that yet. And there was a kind of a prevailing view early on that we were so weird as it was and then there was, and truthfully, at that time in history, there were all these people like Ram Dass and all these weird gurus, around, and we didn't want to get put in that category of, weird spiritual people. So there was logic in it, but it was a limitation. I thought from the beginning, that's a limitation on our ability to touch people's hearts, because talking about their thought, they go to content right away instead of to the power, which is the point. So, but Sid didn't realize that we weren't talking about it for a long time. And then when he found out, we had a group-wide come to Jesus meeting like you cannot imagine, where Sid was like, what is wrong with you people? You're idiots. You're stupid. You're missing the whole freaking point. You know, he was like beside himself, thinking of all the people we'd talked to and never mentioned the spiritual power of the principles. And he wanted to know, you know, I mean, I remember that because it was California. We were at a Berkeley conference, and then there was going to be this meeting with Sid, who flew down for that one opportunity to let us know that we were really messing up big time. And so everybody started talking about the spiritual. It's not like we weren't aware of it. It was like it was a hesitation. It was born of insecurity, I would say. You know, insecurity about whether we could talk about it in a way that would distinguish us from Ram Dass, for example, and whether we had a level of certainty about it that would be easy and natural and not weird. So I think after Sid yelled at us, we kind of thought, okay, back to the drawing board, you know. And honestly, the only book that we had back then was Second Chance. It was Sid's first book. And if you really read Second Chance, it's there. If you read anything Sid's ever written, it's there. But we were kind of looking at the content of the book more than the feeling behind it. And we all started rereading Second Chance, and then he wrote In Quest of the Pearl, which is a very spiritual book. And he, as a matter of fact, that was a conference at which he distributed In Quest of the Pearl, and we all started going like, oh man, we have really messed up big time. We need to fix this. So we kind of took a deep breath and rethought our whole way of going about things. That's how it happened. But Sid was not happy. And those of you who knew Sid know that when Sid was not happy, it's like when Mama's not happy, nobody's happy. Well, he's like, he never hesitated to speak his mind when he had something on his mind. And he was right, obviously, but we were just too insecure to, and I think everybody, and Richard, you could speak to this, I think everybody in Salt Spring was talking about the spiritual from the very beginning. And so we were like the outliers. We were like the weird people in La Conner who were, not necessarily pointing deeper. And, but we got over it, and everything changed. And I think in Hawaii, Karen, and I think you could speak to that too, that when I would go to Hawaii, it was the aloha spirit was very alive. And I think the very fact that Hawaii is permeated with aloha, which is the point of the spiritual, the breath of life, it made it impossible not to go there in Hawaii. So, we were just the United States mainland contingent was the hesitant, insecure group.
Mark, thank you so much for bringing that part of the conversation up, because I think that I share the principles with a small group, and I think that that's sometimes part of my intellectual thinking about how am I going to say this? What am I going to, I'm a woman of God, but they may not be, and they might not understand spirituality, and they might not understand, and the multitude of words that come to describe what Sid was pointing to. So I thank you so much for igniting that in Judith. That's just beautiful, because
let me say something too, that I've talked to a lot of people in, and I used to do groups, chaplains groups in West Virginia. I used to work with the hospital chaplains, and there are all many different denominations, and their version of God is different depending on their denomination. And I would always say the principles are what unifies all religious practices, because religion is born of the desire for people to put their reverence into form and find a way to express it. So if you want to look at it, religion is reverence for creation. And there is a zillion ways that you can show reverence for creation, but beneath it is that desire to show reverence for creation. And that's what the principles describe, is the very act of creating that reverence, finding self-expression. So if you look at it, if people would see that, then religious people might get together and get along better, but they don't necessarily. We get attached to the form and forget that the spirit of it is the same across all religions.
It absolutely is. Yes. Yeah. Wow. Yes, sir, please.
I thought actually it was an interesting point to mention, because actually here I have kind of a similar in Indonesia. Sorry, I have to remind people who haven't seen me yet, who just came in recently. In Indonesia, because the majority of people here are actually Muslim. And so sometimes you kind of have the feeling, it's like, okay, when you mention something about God, how do you present that? And how do you mention it without actually even mentioning any particular, as you say, any particular denomination?
And so that the way I most of the time, because they ask me, well, what is mind? What does mind refer to? And stuff. And I said, it's just the divine. It's just the godly. And you can call him God, or you can call him Allah, or you can call him Hindu, Buddha, or whatever it is that you want to call.
Call him Joe, it doesn't matter, right?
As such. But the whole thing is, it's,
or her.
It actually doesn't have a name. It's just creation, what you see right in front of you, which you yourself are part of. And so whatever you want to name it, it is up to you. It's just creation.
See, you're really pointing again to the feeling and not the words.
Exactly. So it's that has to come over. But yeah.
Now, I never mentioned God. I mean, I have nothing against mentioning God, and I don't mind if people do, but I always talk about, I use words like divine mind, divine creation, and talk about divine referring to whatever it is that we feel reverence for, because it's a mysterious thing that we know is there, but we don't understand it. And so whatever that mysterious, beautiful power is in us and flows through us, but you can't. It's like, babies can't describe the womb. We may have come from there, but none of us remember anything about it.
Yes.
And that's
yes.
It's the same thing. It's like I've never met a child who could say, yeah, I really liked it back in my mom's womb. There was nice walls, and it was really, good food, and nice music. They don't know. We have no idea, but we came from, you can't describe what is of your essence.
Yeah, I love it.
But as you say, it's the feeling. It's the feeling of what you get. And the moment you just talk about the divine and just describe it as in a more generalized, because some people can get quite emotional about it. Just the fact that you mentioned the wrong name in the wrong in the wrong context.
Right.
And some people can really get emotional about it. And it's like, it's whatever it is because sometimes, especially here in Indonesia, at times it can be an issue if you mention it to the wrong person, mentioning in the wrong context.
Right.
But the thing is, then the moment you say it, it's like, I'm not saying anything against you, your religion, or against mine. I'm just describing our common belief of the fact, yes, we believe in one unity which does shape everything around us. And you can fill in the blanks. Right. So whatever goes around it and how it was formed and how you see it. I just want to say that just kind of as a little bit of a background from my side here in Indonesia.
Well, I appreciate that. That's lovely. I appreciate that.
Thank you, sir. Richard, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Kelly.
Hi, Richard.
Hi, Judy. And I just wanted to crib in on the comment there about, that moment in time where Lacan or the psychologists were not speaking spiritually. And I look back on the early years that we were listening to Sid, and one of the highlights was actually that moment in time when the psychology became interested in what the results were for Sid. Who is this man on Salt Spring Island that was achieving results that the field of psychology was not able to achieve? And I know the 3PGC originals session, George and Linda and numerous others, and I think yourself was there as well, Judy. And it was this curiosity factor of the people that were in fact listening to Sid then met the first two psychologists, George and Roger, when they came sort of on orders from John Enright to check out this man on Salt Spring Island that was seeing transformations in ordinary people that just weren't happening in the psychological field. And I recall Roger saying that after he did come and check out Sid and everything else, that when he had his insights that, and I'd say they happened pretty quick, because George and he went home and said to John, we can't do what we're doing anymore. We're damaging people more than we're actually helping them. Mm-hmm. So I totally get the whatever word you might want to use to describe your feelings of not using that word spiritual in conversation, because even people that are not directly connected to the three principles, but have deep spiritual roots. And I know a woman here in Vancouver, there's actually two of them. They shared with me that there was a comfort level in the business community that spirituality was becoming part of the dialogue for them, which was cool, because that to me showed me that what was going on with the principles was making its way into the business community all in. I mean, it made it into the education community. It made it into all other, well, it makes it into every community is the thing.
Right.
Like there's no differentiation really. The root of it is. And this is the challenge, I think, sir, is that regardless of which word you might choose, and Sid used the word metaphor, which is an analogy for something, or reference to something, it really doesn't matter what word you choose. Again, the feeling itself conveys the essence of whatever word or metaphor you would choose to describe the indescribable. And I think that's a very cool fact about the principles. How do you describe it? And it really doesn't matter what words you use to describe it. So anyways, I thought I'd just crib in there, because like the curiosity of who are these psychologists amongst the group that was listening to Sid in those days, Kelly, was pretty high. Were they more curious, or were we more curious? And just the fact that psychology was finally interested in what Sid was teaching back then.
I thank you so much. And I can't wait to connect.
And Sid went on to write, I would describe, pure spiritual book that was number 3 in his series of books, and that's The Missing Link. The first 2 were novels that had truth throughout them, but The Missing Link is truth from A to Z, cover to cover. That was an interesting book for me to design and lay out, because it was totally different from any kind of logical book, because it was a series of, it could be one sentence that Sid wanted to emphasize. And how do you do that other than create space around it so that you could focus the reader on just that sentence? Yeah, so it was a really interesting book from a point of view of doing the creative work for it. And I'm glad that, like, for me, it's a go-to book, because you can crack open whatever page you want, and with no intent of finding something that you want to read, wherever you crack it open, just read it.
Yeah.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks for sharing.
Thanks, Judy. You've shared amazing things today.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Richard. It's good to see you.
Karen, go ahead. Mark or Karen, I'm not sure whose question or insight it is.
It was me again. I was resounding with the gentleman from Indonesia talking about essentially people in every religion are like Judy was saying are expressing their reverence and their intuitive or instinctive feeling for there being a greater power behind all of this, and the wonder of life, or whatever the silence before that's deep in our hearts, the calmness that's there all the time. And I was thinking that one way of expressing this beyond the religious way of saying God or whatever, an entity, is a state of mind. It's a state of mind that is beyond your normal states of mind, of being conscious of this life that we're living in and everything that comes up. It's being carried, to me, in my experience, it was being carried to a place that you didn't even really know existed. You didn't know that it existed until you experienced it, that you're carried through to a place where you're connected to a beautiful, beautiful feeling of energy. And from that, you're conscious of it. You have the thought that it exists. That, oh my God, this is what it's like. And I think we all have access to that. And we seek too hard for it. We're trying too hard to get it. And it's just there. We just have to relax and be grateful. And what Richard said was wonderful about the business community resounding with it. And I think it comes through in forms of gratitude for your customers and for your employees and for your bosses and for everybody who's participating and being of service. And there's different ways that different industries embrace. Anyway, that was a secondary thing.
Yeah.
State of mind is a good way to put it. Judy, were you gonna go ahead?
Somebody say something?
Thank
No.
you, Mark. That was lovely. And yeah, the conversation has just been so rich, so rich. And Judith, I thank you for sharing the stories. I said to Judith before we began that every speaker that comes presents part of the story, a little piece of what went before. And so I feel very blessed to have you share your story and the things that came insightfully to you, the wisdom that you found within this understanding. And if we have time, maybe just for one more person before we say our goodbyes. Does anybody have anything on their mind or? All right. Well,
Great.
has been fabulous. And I hope all of you look and seek out the book that Judith has spent her COVID hours preparing for all of us.
Yeah.
And thank you all for coming. I have enjoyed seeing new faces and old ones. And if you'd like to open up your mics and say farewell to Judith, that would be awesome too.
Thank you so much, Judy.
Thanks, Judith.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Judy,
Bye.
thank you. Hope to talk to you again soon.
Anytime. Yeah. I look forward to it.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Judith.
Welcome.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Kelly. Thank you, Judith.
Lovely.
It was great to see old friends and new, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So much. Judith, I can't say enough. I'm going to turn off the recording.